Hi students, I'm going to deliver the third lecture of our week 1 in the chemistry of life on acids and bases and what the pH scale is. We're going to skip the warm-up. Now pH, a lot of people think from middle school, stands for percentage of hydrogen, but it actually stands for the power of hydrogen. And what it does is it helps us quantify the number of hydrogen ions that are present in a solution. So what is a hydrogen ion? It's basically a hydrogen atom that has a positive charge. So a normal neutral hydrogen atom would have a proton, an electron that orbits it, but in a hydrogen ion, it's simply just the nucleus with the one proton. So that's why it has this positive charge. Now, how can we tell what the pH of a solution is? We use different types of indicators that will basically change color in the presence of an acid or a base. Universal indicator is the most common one that we use. So strong acids are going to be more on the red-orange scale, and weaker acids are going to be more green and yellow. Bases, on the other hand, are going to be more green and blue, and the strong bases are going to be dark blue and purple. So any number that's 0 through 6 is considered acidic, 7 is neutral, and finally any number that is 8 or higher is considered a base. The main ion, of course, that makes something acidic is H+, and the main ion that makes anything, or the main molecule that makes anything basic, is OH minus. And we'll talk a little bit more about these molecules that are responsible for an acid or basis property. First, let's talk about what exactly acids are. So acids are liquids or solutions or substances that have a very high volume of H plus ions. So the way pH is written for strong acids is a little bit of an opposite. It's an inverse relation. So the lower the pH number is, okay, the higher the number of hydrogen ions are, and the stronger that acid is considered to be. So it's an inverse. The lower your pH is, the stronger of an acid that substance is. Okay? So battery acid is a really strong acid, and it has, I think, a pH of around 1. Citric acid, what you find in lemons, is considered also to be a strong acid, so it's usually around 1 to 2. But you can see that we do eat some citric acid, not really battery acid. That's not a good idea. So in chemistry, you'll actually go over more of the reasons why some strong acids can have really low pHs, but we can eat certain things versus others. Coffee is considered to be a weak acid, and it's around like 6 in its pH level. So this means coffee has a little less hydrogen ions compared to stronger acids. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about bases, because in some ways they are very similar to acids, and in other ways they are like the polar opposite. So I'm going to change my pen color to reflect that. So the ion that mainly we find in bases is OH minus. So it's an oxygen and a hydrogen atom bonded together, and they have a negative charge. Okay, so in bases you have very few H plus ions, but you have a high number of these OH minus ions. So it's a little bit opposite because it has a negative charge. However, it is also really reactive, like H plus. It wants to basically go and bond with different substances that it's in because it has that negative charge. So the higher the number of OH minus molecules you have, the more reactive we consider that base to be. Okay, so let's go ahead and just draw that up. So basically, the higher you have OH molecules, the higher your pH number is, and the stronger of a base you are. So bleach is a very strong base. It's about like a 12.5 to 13 pH, so it has a pretty high amount of OH minus. Soap is a pretty weak base. Usually it's around like 8 to 9. So this is like a weaker base. And salt water is also considered to be a weak base. So it has a pH of around 8. Now, you might be wondering, why are strong acids lower in their pH number than strong bases? So it's a little bit of an inverse. And let's talk about how the pH scale is organized. So we are used to linear scales where basically as you increase one side, the other side is also going to increase at the same rate. Okay, so this is what we call a linear scale. However, a logarithmic scale is the opposite. All right, so it's kind of similar to like an exponential where it goes like this. All right, and then the logarithmic scale is basically just taking that exponential and flipping it. Okay, you don't have to worry too much about this. You'll learn more about them in math. But basically, pH is written in a logarithmic scale. So every number in the pH scale is not just one time lower or higher than the previous number, it's actually 10 times less than the number below it, and that just keeps expanding. Okay, so let's take a look at the pHs of these particular examples right here. So this has a pH of 1, this one has a pH of 7, and this one has a pH of 10. So here, basically, it is 0.1, so this is like 10%. Over here, this is basically like 1 millionth, okay, at a pH of 7. And then this one over here, sorry, I can't really spell. This one over here is at a pH of 1 over 100 million. So let's go ahead and take a deeper look at what exactly are logarithmic scales and some other things that are made up of logarithmic scales. So the decibel system is how we measure sound, and it's also in a logarithmic scale. Okay, so it's not that breathing is like 10 times louder or rustling leaves is 10 times louder compared to silence. Breathing is 10 times, but rustling leaves is 100 times louder compared to silence, or whispering is 1,000 times louder compared to silence. So you can see how this expands so quickly, and some things will actually end up in a really dangerous zone because they're not 180 times, they're actually 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. Okay, so as long as you get the idea that the logarithmic scale moves a lot quicker than the linear scale, you're good to go. So let's see a more graphic example of this. So when something is a pH of 1, you're basically saying that 1 in every 10 molecules present in that solution is a hydrogen ion. So this is like saying you've got something with 10% hydrogen ions in it, and that's a pretty strong acid. So you're saying like 10% of your solution is going to react. And the same thing applies for bases, okay? So a pH of 14 is basically like saying 1 in every 10 molecules you have present is going to be OH minus. So again, that's like 10% of your solution is going to react. And that's why it's a strong base. Now let's compare that to weak acids and bases. So a weak acid, okay, at a pH of 4, basically that's like saying 1 in every 10,000 molecules is an H plus ions. That's kind of like this, okay, to say like in a percentage. So it's like 1 in every 10,000 molecules is H plus ion. Same deal over here with a weaker base. This is like basically saying 1 in every 10,000 molecules you have is an OH minus ion, a hydroxide ion. Okay, so you can see maybe the visual difference in the two, and hopefully that'll help you understand why the pH scale functions the way it does. Okay, now let's talk about water. So pure water is neutral and it has a pH of 7. Most of our tap water is not at 7 because that means the water has to be free of salts and ions. All right, and that's a little bit difficult to ensure that it's going to be free of salts and ions. Living things rely a lot on acids and bases to function. So here are some of the things that we have that rely on acids and bases, like stomach acid, blood buffer, and gas exchange. We do want to make sure that we have the proper pH in order for your blood to function properly, in order for you to exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen, and also in order for you to digest your food. Okay, so one last thing to kind of remember is that basically those numbers are the negative exponent of how many hydrogen ions are present in a volume of whatever your substance is. So that's what this should say, like a different solution. Okay, because if we have 1 times 10 to the negative 4, so it's basically like saying 1 in every 10,000 molecules is going to be, your hydrogen ion. So we take that negative exponent here, we basically take the negative of that exponent, and that's what gives us our pH of 4. Okay, so it's just important for you to interpret those numbers well. Ocean acidification is a really huge problem with climate change because when we release a lot of carbon dioxide, a lot of that ends up into our oceans and actually changes the pH levels, and that can have a huge impact on living things. So please check out this small video that I've linked onto Google Classroom. The last thing I want to talk about is buffer solutions. Now, you will see this more in AP Bio, but it's important to get an idea of what are some buffers that are there in our body and what exactly are buffers. These are solutions that prevent really strong pH change, so they're resistant to strong acids and bases. All right, take care.